to get sick, workers continue to get sick, and we cannot allow for any new surge to happen, specifically to make it so that frontline workers who are keeping us in our homes are continuing to get sick. Let's be clear that COVID vaccines are great, and we are happy that at least there is more vaccines coming into our state, but those vaccines are not substitute for the protections of health and safety protections for workers. So we're here today to say that we must ensure that New York Hero passes this month. We cannot wait. We've been waiting for a whole year. At this particular moment, the guidelines that are put forward are not efficient and are not the only things that can cover our needs at this moment. We cannot afford to reopen our state without these permanent health and safety protections for all workers and for our communities. We continue to sacrifice so much for all of us, and we owe this to our workers and to all the essential workers right now. Workers know what they need, and New York Hero does that. So to that end, I want to say that we're very close, and I'd like to introduce you. We're very close to passage of the bill, thanks to legislators at the Senate and the Assembly who are working really hard to make sure that this bill is passed. I'd like to introduce you first to Senator Gianaris, who has championed the passage of the bill in the Senate. Senator Gianaris.
Thank you, Maritza, and thanks to the entire coalition that's worked so hard on getting this done. I am excited. The Senate, we got this bill passed a few weeks ago, and we have great colleagues in the Assembly. I know Assemblymember Reyes is on this call, Assemblymember Gallagher, and others who are working very hard to get it over the finish line in the Assembly so we can actually have it in place. We are starting to loosen up. The curfew at restaurants just went from 11 o'clock to midnight. I myself have been to a Mets game where we're now allowing people to attend. So we're loosening up the restrictions. One thing we have to make sure as we do that is that the workers in these places of employment are protected. We know for a fact there were more deaths than there should have been in the spring of last year because too many employers were not being scrupulous about protecting their workers and having standards in place. That's why we introduced the HERO Act to begin with, to require employers to have standards, have safety standards as it relates to PPE, air filtration, social distancing, all the things that we are now so familiar with. Too many employers are not requiring to provide safety for their workers. And we need to get this in place as soon as possible as we continue to loosen up the strings on the economy, getting people back to work. We need to do it safely because we certainly don't want to go through another wave of horrible, horrible deaths in our state. And so I'm really excited to be working with Assemblymember Reyes on this. She's been a great partner, a great advocate, and the members of the coalition who have gotten this bill on the map and gotten it so far through the process already. Thank you so much for what you do. We're going to keep fighting until this gets done, and we need to do it as fast as we possibly can. So I'm committed to that cause, and thank you all very much for fighting for it.
Thank you, Senator Gianaris, for your leadership. And that is right. Senator Gianaris, a sponsor of the bill, as well as Assemblywoman Reyes, have been a sponsor and working closely with our coalition. And let me be clear, not only with the leaders of the organizations that are part of this coalition, which I'm going to mention in a moment, but also with workers. It's really critical that we actually hear from workers once again, because workers know what they need. And Assemblywoman Reyes have actually done the work of being at the front lines. Assemblywoman Reyes know what workers need and has been working with us from the start. So I want to now introduce you to Assemblywoman Reyes.
Thank you, Maritza. Thank you to all the advocates and the coalition that's here. I want to thank Senator Gianaris for his leadership in moving this through the Senate. We have been working very hard on the budget, but we haven't lost sight of what is important for us. And this is a major issue that we need to get past before the year is over, before the session is over, but as soon as possible. What we've been seeing is more people getting vaccinated, but what we've been seeing across the country is an increase and an uptake in COVID infections. And that is not because vaccines don't work. That is because people are really letting their guard down. And as we begin to open up and loosen restrictions, we have to make sure that there are standards in place that employers can follow, that employees can follow, that there is some recourse for those employees whose employers aren't protecting them and providing the necessary precautions for them. It's very simple. And we've been saying this from the beginning, the protocols that we could put in place, adequate PPE, social distancing, disinfection, all those things work. The science on everything else has been changing, right? But that science hasn't changed, and it hasn't changed for decades. And that's what we want to make sure that we are providing to every industry in our state, to all workers, so they're able to protect themselves. People are still dying from this. And we want to make sure that as our economy begins to open, and we want our economy to open, right? And we want our economy to open safely, and we want people to be protected. So we see this as something that is very needed. It is essential to the reopening of our economy and of our state. And it's something that we are going to see to the finish line very soon. Right now, this bill is in Ways and Means in the Assembly. It's already passed the Senate. And we know that leadership is very interested in this, and we have a significant number of co-sponsors who support this initiative as well. So I want to thank all of you, and thank all of you for all your advocacy and all the work that you've been doing around this, to making sure that we keep our state as healthy and safe as possible.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Reyes. Thank you for your leadership and for all the work that you're doing to protect our communities, to protect our workers. I would like to also introduce you now to Senator Ramos, who has also been working really hard to protect workers, not only during this pandemic, but even before this pandemic. Senator Ramos has been at the front lines as well, not only with this coalition, but all the coalitions that have been looking after workers during these horrible times. Senator Ramos.
Hi, thank you, Maritza. It's a pleasure to be with you guys this morning. You know, our workers are still on the front lines protecting us, and we need to make sure that we're protecting them. And that's why I've been so supportive of this bill. Senator Gianaris has really been leading us in conference in the Senate, making sure that this stays at the top of our agenda, even though we've passed it. I know Karines is very close. Her leadership has been wonderful on this and so many labor issues, because she's a labor leader herself. And I just want to give kudos to them and to you, Maritza, and everybody else who's been working so hard to make sure that workers' voices are heard, because unfortunately not enough workers are organized into unions, and they don't have a guaranteed voice on the job. And that's exactly what this bill does. It ensures that the way workers want to feel protected at work is the way the law will be written. And that's why this bill is so important, and why I prioritized it out of the Labor Committee very early this year. I really hope it becomes law soon, before we see any other tragedy happen at the workplace. We want our workers to stay safe. We want to learn our lessons from this pandemic, and we want to make sure everybody's able to go home safely. So thank you for having me, and I really hope this bill becomes law soon.
Thank you, Senator Ramos. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing to make sure that we get the laws passed at the state level, so that workers and communities will be protected. And you're right, the Assembly will be moving into a vote hopefully pretty soon, thanks to the leadership of Assemblywoman Reyes, and we really appreciate all the work that's been put forward. We know that many of the senators and Assembly members have been aware of what's happening in their communities. There is no time to wait. We must not only hear from workers, we must not only say thank you to workers, but rather actually provide the protections for workers by listening to what they need and make sure that these kind of laws are passed. New York Hero is a way in which we're going to be able to get there. We heard from workers, and you're talking so much about workers who are also very vulnerable, workers who are not having any protections because they are not members of a union. And I'd like to introduce you now to Teresa Martinez, who can share her story specifically as a laundry worker. She's a member of the Laundry Worker Center, one of our coalition members. Teresa.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Teresa Martínez, soy miembro del Centro de Trabajadores de Lavandería. Durante esta pandemia, las trabajadoras esenciales hemos sufrido nuestras vidas ahí en peligro porque hemos tenido que trabajar en condiciones deplorables, sin acceso a mascarillas o guantes. Los empleadores no respetan el distanciamiento social y no desinfectan el lugar en donde nosotros trabajamos. No nos dan guantes y ni mascarillas. Nosotros las trabajadoras de lavandería estamos expuestas al COVID y a otras enfermedades. Tenemos que lavar ropa de la ambulancia que vienen con fluidos y humanos y ropa que posiblemente esté contaminada con alguna enfermedad. Los trabajadores esenciales en estos momentos estamos viviendo una vida muy difícil, pero lamentablemente tenemos que trabajar a costa de nuestra salud. Muchas trabajadoras han muerto, lamentablemente no es por la vacuna, sino por el lugar que nos dan para trabajar, que está sucio y no lo han desinfectado. Yo quisiera que cambiaran las prácticas dentro del lugar de nuestro trabajo de lavanderías. También podemos negarnos a hacerlos, pero la necesidad nos hace seguir trabajando en esa lavandería. Por eso es importante que se pase el acta de héroes de Nueva York. De lo contrario, nuestras comunidades van a seguir expuestas y vulnerables. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Teresa, por tu coraje. And thank you so much, Teresa, for your courage and for all the work that you're doing as a leader in this movement, as a worker who knows exactly what's happening on the front lines. And it is really critical for all the legislators at the state level, including Governor Cuomo, to hear these stories and ensure that no one more day goes by without creating this protection for workers. Up next, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Koshul Kavbanti from the Emergency Medicine Resident at Jacobin. He's a member of CIR.
Thank you, Maritza. Also, thank you to Ms. Martinez, Senators Ramos, Gianaris, all of our elected officials, essential workers, speaking in support of the New York HERO Act. As Maritza mentioned, my name is Dr. Koshul Kavbanti. I'm a third-year emergency medicine resident in the Bronx over at Jacoby Medical Center, proud member of the Committee of Interns and Residents, SEIU. To say the least, this year has been uniquely harrowing. Today, I'm calling on New York Assembly to pass the New York HERO Act urgently to protect our essential workers. As a doctor, I feel grateful and I take pride in the privilege I have to care for my New York City and Bronx communities, but my thoughts were and still are flooded with painful losses within the emergency department, specifically from this past year. You know, for months on end, we would see patient after patient enter the ED as if through a revolving door with COVID, many getting progressively sicker by the hour. And I think what was most troubling was the large proportion of essential workers who we cared for. You know, it was our taxi drivers, our food distributors, grocery store workers, cleaners, or laundry workers. It was harrowing to watch the literal backbone of our society succumb to COVID. In addition, it's pushed healthcare workers like myself to our limits, but it didn't always have to be this way, right? We had the protection. If we had the protections of the New York HERO Act, we could have saved lives, and passing it now, we will protect our essential workers and keep them out of our EDs. You know, we need to pass the New York HERO Act now because while COVID revealed itself as uniquely enraged disease, it honestly bears resemblance to the troublesome influenza season we see and experience in the Bronx every year. Another respiratory illness with which most do just fine, but it leaves the most vulnerable, the most exposed, the sickest in its tracks. You know, even as folks have mentioned, even though we're seeing the vaccine roll out, my ED is still seeing far too many of our essential workers with COVID. And as the virus continues to spread, we risk further mutations that the vaccines may not be as effective against. You know, we need the New York HERO Act now so we can help stop the virus from spreading and giving it a chance to mutate. just to sort of close out, as a doctor, I've been called a hero and thanked many times over the last year. I appreciate all of these sentiments. They're fantastic. But I truly feel that the best way to thank us and to honor all of our frontline and essential workers is to pass this act so we can protect our patients and ensure we don't ever have our emergency rooms flooded again with COVID, flu, or another respiratory illness. I think it's time that we have to take care of those who take care of New York. So thanks for listening, and hopefully we can get this passed.
Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate your comments, and you are a hero as much as all the frontline workers who have been really at the front lines of this pandemic, and it still is. I want to remind us that the pandemic, it's not over. COVID is still around, and our communities are still taking risk every single day, particularly vulnerable workers who are in the farms picking up the fruits and the vegetables for us to be able to consume. So I want to first of all introduce you to Carolina Ramos, a farm worker, and thank Carolina for all the work that she's been doing to be able to provide food and bring food to our tables across the state. Carolina.
Sorry, Maritza, Carolina is having a little trouble entering, but I've just talked to her by phone. If we could bump her maybe 1 or 2 speakers back, and hopefully we'll have her on board. Thank you.
Sounds good, no problem. We'll come back to Carolina. So up next, I'd like to introduce you to an Assemblywoman who also is a leader in all the work and has been in the front line with all of us, ensuring that workers are protected, ensuring that we move forward together in addressing all of these issues that our communities have been facing and continue to face, particularly the most vulnerable. Catalina Cruz, Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz.
Thank you, Maritza. Buenos días a todos. It is an honor to get to fight along your side and with my colleague Karina Reyes in her leadership, not only during the pandemic. I tell her all the time, I am in awe of everything she was able to do to literally save lives, along with helping us do our work as legislators. And look, one of the things that Maritza said is listen to workers. If you sit here and you listened to story after story of the lived experience of these workers, and I was actually very much looking forward to hearing Carolina, because one of the most neglected populations in our state continues to be our farm workers. And what we want to make sure is that those same people that, while many others, not many of us here, had the opportunity to stay home, the opportunity to take care of their family, the opportunity to remain healthy, many of you had to go out there and pick the food, cook the food, deliver the food, make sure that the supermarkets were stocked. All of those things that ensured the rest of us could have some sort of semblance of normalcy in the middle of all of this. And many of you got sick, many of your colleagues died, and we can't have that anymore. It's not enough to come out at 7 p.m. every night, as it was happening for a while, not only to thank the doctors and the nurses, but those, that hitting of the pans and pots was for many of you. But what good is that if when we have the opportunity to really create a safe and healthy work environment, we do nothing? So not only am I proud to support the bill, I am going to be voting in favor of the bill, and I'm going to be encouraging my colleagues, because I think it is the one way in which we can make sure that it isn't so much about honoring, simply respecting your existence, because we have to respect you enough to create a safe working environment, because you deserve it. It is as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Catalina. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Y vamos a seguir luchando juntos. Muchas gracias. Now we're going to be able to hear from Carolina Cruz, who was able to join in. Carolina, you are next. Are we good? Okay. Maybe there is some technical difficulties there. All right, we're going to move along. We have a few other speakers. Maybe we'll wait until Carolina is back. But maybe I would like to introduce you in the meantime to Assemblywoman, Assemblyperson Khalil Anderson.
Thank you so much, Maritza. And thank you to all of the essential and frontline workers who are here today, who are sharing their stories, and who are part of what will be history here in the state of New York, making sure that we provide protection for the people that protected us from disease, the people who protected us from this virus, and the people who are on the front lines during the height and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Standard PPE, making sure that people have access to it, making sure that OSHA guidelines are enforceable. These are the things that will make sure that our folks who are frontline workers, people who are victims or have been victims of the COVID-19 crisis, could have the supports that they need. And I'm so grateful for Cardenas Reyes, my colleague, as well as Senator Gianaris, who have introduced this bill to be able to protect our frontline workers, the people who have done so much for us. And also to close, I want to thank Catalina for mentioning the fact that every evening at 7 p.m. we would celebrate these frontline workers, these essential workers. Now let's take that celebration to the next level. Let's take that celebration to the halls of Albany and make sure that we pass this bill for frontline workers, not just here in New York City, but all across the state, who are essential, who deserve fair treatment, and who deserve the basic rights that are afforded by the HEROES Act. So thank you all very much for having this press conference. Let's get a win for our frontline workers.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Colleen Anderson. And yes, I know that you're going to bring it in, and we're going to make sure that every Assembly member votes in favor of this bill once we get when the bill gets to the floor. I count on you vote, and everybody else in the Assembly, crossing fingers here. Up next, I think if Carolina Ramos, the farm worker, is available, and I think I might have spoken before. Carolina Ramos, if you are there, we would love to hear from you. The farm workers have a lot to say and really how this pandemic has affected them. Carolina, are you there? Well, while we wait for Carolina, I do want to give a shout out to every single organization who has been working day in and day out on this coalition. Let's remember this is a labor and community and worker-centered coalition. It's incredible to see the collaboration that's been happening with groups like UFCW, RWDSU, NISNA, groups like ATU, and shout out to DC 37, and shout out to the groups from the Laundry Worker Centers, from the folks from that are right now organizing with many of the members of the Amazon campaign, workers who are at the front lines. So let's give a shout out to the Teamsters. I will be keeping giving shout outs to all the members of the coalition. We have about 70 something organizations here. So thank you to all of you. And I wanna thank to specifically all the workers who have been at the front lines with us this entire time. Well, while we wait, it looks like there might be some technical issues at this moment. We're going to move along on the agenda, and I'd like to introduce to Assemblywoman Gallagher, who is also supportive of this bill and has been working with us. Oh, never mind. Carolina might be on now. Sorry, technical difficulties. The Zoom world. What are we going to do?
Gracias, Carolina. Ya estamos listos para... Gracias.
Gracias, Carolina.
Okay. Yo pienso que es muy importante eso de las vacunas porque todos lo necesitamos. Es decir, porque todos estamos trabajando, todos necesitamos la vacuna del COVID, necesitamos la ayuda porque es muy necesaria. Es como decir, para que ya pare la epidemia y todo eso.
Thank you, Carolina. We might have lost you there. We have Assemblywoman Gallagher. Perhaps if you are there, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Maritza. And thank you to Align and to the sponsors of this bill, Assemblymember Reyes and Senator Gianaris. During COVID, New York City has lost thousands of workers, and so many of our losses have been on the front lines, continuing on in workplaces that distressingly don't always have a serious attitude about the virus. I myself have heard from scared workers who feel they are risking their lives because of casual workplace protocol. I believe that it is our duty as legislators to put the most vulnerable workers at the center of our focus. And I'd like to read a little bit from a worker that I was emailed by regarding her fear at her workplace. She is an office worker. And she says that I'm working at a job where by exploiting a loophole, they are able to call the office workers attached to the warehouse essential and require us to work on site, even though they have the means and wherewithal to allow us to work from home. The workplace conditions in general were misrepresented to me at the beginning of the job, and I had already accepted and needed the position before I realized how bad the conditions were. I also see warehouse workers being forced to take their meals in unsafe conditions and pressure not to make a big deal of it. Their mask protocol is not enforced. Office workers are less than 6 feet apart in an open office with no windows, and one of my unmasked colleagues had a symptomatic case of the virus the second day I worked there. The bosses have some serious misunderstandings of the virus situation and the science that comes from outdated CDC guidelines. Are not keeping up with the news or the new guidelines. They do not understand how the virus spreads or what masks do, and they are resistant to being educated by their own staff because they have a top-down mentality. It's really important that we as legislators and as activists see that the workers need empowerment through the law so that we can make sure that they're able to protect themselves, because in many cases, they just don't have the resources in the workplace to hold the bosses accountable to the COVID protocol. And I'm so glad that Carolina mentioned the vaccine, because we also know that vaccine rollout has been very uneven. And many of our most essential workers, many of the people who have been putting their lives most on the line, have not had the opportunity to get the vaccine. So as a legislator, I pledge that I will be working to hold workplaces accountable for the way that they're treating their workers. And I think that the HERO Act is a core piece of that. So I am very grateful that this bill is coming forward, and I'm going to push it until we get it passed. And I am so grateful that I have such wonderful colleagues that are really making this possible for workers across all sectors. Thank you so much for the work that you've done, and I'm going to keep pushing for the HERO Act in the Assembly.
That's exactly what I like to hear. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Gallagher. We really appreciate your leadership here. And let's not forget that the people who are here today, some of the Assembly members who have spoken today are the leaders in the Assembly, and more to come. I know that everybody is supporting the bill, and I would love to introduce you now to another leader, a woman who I admire a whole lot. Join me on my Latina work. We are the Latinas United. I'd like to introduce you to Assemblywoman Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. You are an inspiration, and thank you for supporting our bill and for being here today.
Thank you, Maritza. Thank you to everyone here. I know this work is a huge, huge coalition effort, and that's what it takes to get this done. My name is Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. I am a new Assembly member from the 34th Assembly District, which includes the neighborhoods of Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, and Woodside. And these are communities that have been hardest hit. Like, we were literally the epicenter alongside my sister Carolina Cruz's district, which our neighborhoods overlap and we share communities. We have a rich and vibrant community of diverse folks from all parts of the world. And it is those folks that have put their lives on the line to make sure that we were safe. that we were fed, that we got the healthcare that we needed in this moment. And it is about time that we stand up for these workers and ensure that they have the proper protocols in place, the proper standards in place to remain safe, to remain healthy, and to have a dignified work environment. And that's what this bill is about. It is about uplifting and protecting our heroes that have stood up and fought for us time and time again in the middle of the worst pandemic in our world, in our world's history. So I'm so proud to be a co-sponsor. I am so grateful for the organizing that is behind this work. It is so critical to bring impacted folks to the front lines of this work, right? To raise their hand and say, this enough. We deserve dignified work conditions that are safe, that ensure that we're healthy and that our families are healthy. So I am really committed to getting this done. I am so grateful for all the leadership of the folks in the room. And I thank you all for having me. I'm really grateful to continue to fight and get this bill passed.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Gonzalez Rojas. We really appreciate your leadership in the Assembly, and thank you. We're glad you're there and really doing amazing work.
Thank you.
Up next, I want to just also talk a bit about, this issue of COVID-19 has been discussed in the context of what workers need, and workers have shared their experiences. But also we have to listen to scientists. And today we have the privilege to have one of the scientists who have been looking at how this virus is expanding, how this virus actually is working and really expanded all over in the air. So I would like to introduce you to Lupita Montoya, the environmental engineer, who also believes that this bill is the way to go. Lupita, please.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Dr. Lupita Montoya, and I am an advisor to the Last Mile, which promoted this type of work, and I'm very happy to work with them. We scientists don't get to do this very often. And this is a network of scientists coming together to work with labor unions and other essential workers in organizations to fight against the spread of COVID-19. So I have a special place for New York. I am presently in Colorado, but when I completed my PhD studying indoor air quality and aerosols, which is how the COVID is being spread, I came to New York to study how to work with communities, especially disadvantaged communities. So I have a very special place for New York and the way that I've been trained to use my science to help. So I'm here in support as a scientist who values the knowledge and the wisdom embedded in our communities, especially those of our most disadvantaged communities. It is from this scientific understanding that I'm here to tell you that we need to center communities of color that are most affected by this pandemic in coming up with solutions in this crisis. We need to listen to the voices of communities of color and then yield tangible changes where real action happens. Science needs to yield real and practical results that benefit the most impacted communities, like those that we're talking about today. That is why it is essential that the New York State Assembly pass the New York HERE Act and that the governor signs it into law. This act will enshrine into law the participation of workers in making sure that their workplaces are COVID safe. This is the kind of community-based science that we need to push for. This is an act that will authorize the establishment of health and safety committees at work sites that can raise concerns about violations in health and health standards. It is exactly the kind of public health solutions we urgently need now, and in order to successfully fight, against pandemics that are going to come in the future as well. Scientists and public health experts must listen to the voices of impacted communities if we are serious about stopping the COVID pandemic. I'm calling on the New York State Assembly to pass it, and then for Governor Cuomo to sign the New York HERE Act into law. It is urgent that we listen again to the voices of the frontline workers like we did today, now, and develop health and safety communities in every workplace to fight this COVID-19. This legislation can be a model, in fact, for the whole country. Colorado is nowhere near that. Or how to include communities most impacted in public health solutions. Scientists' solutions that stop COVID-19 in its tracks depends upon community participation of low-income communities of color most impacted by the pandemic. You got my support. This is why I went to school. I'm glad to be here supporting my people.
Thank you, Dr. Montoya. Thank you so much for going to school and making sure that you bring your voice into these conversations, and particularly the voice of communities of color, which is really, really critical in this fight. Up next, I'd like to introduce you to Sojini, who is a UFCW 2013 member. Sojini. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. I work for Mountain View at Edgewood Home Care for Adults down in Beacon, New York. And we caught the virus here back in September, all of us. And it was a rough time for us because we was going through so much, and we lost many patients to the virus as well. And it was a dark time because I caught it when we was out. And so we struggled with a lot of stuff. And then we came back to work, and it was so hard to come back to work. I don't know if you guys know how effective this virus has been. Maybe some of you have caught it. It was so hard for me in particular. I mean, I remember coming by the door, I just didn't want to come in because, the virus was tough. I was out for 3 weeks. But I think a lot of times with the HERO Act, the reason I support it is because a lot of times as I'm a shop steward for the AIDS, so a lot of times as AIDS, HHA, PCA, we feel like we are unforgetful. Nobody remembers us, and we put our life on the line for everyday risk our life, and we were not recognized as essential workers. So I think this HERO Act would essential workers, and we are also on the front line, and we also helping taking care of the patients and doing whatever is necessary to get them back to where they need to be. So this COVID it's been a rough year. It still is a rough year. It's hesitant. A lot of my coworkers didn't come back, and it's just been rough altogether. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for joining us and for really sharing your story. It's really awful what's happening, and even for our assembly members, senators, and for the governor, they need to hear from you. They need to hear that we are still battling this awful pandemic and that things are not over. We cannot reopen our state without thinking about how right now our workers and our communities continue to be affected. There has to be protections in the workplace. There have to be health and safety, permanent protections in the workplace. New York HERO will do that. And up next, I do want to invite Ari Moma from the New York State Nurses Association. Ari has also been hearing and being at the front lines of this pandemic, hearing from patients, and also being at the front lines himself. Ari, up next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ari Moma. I'm a registered nurse at Interfaith Medical Center, and also a proud member of one of the largest nurses union in New York State, and NISNA. I stand here today, to ask our elected officials, to pass the New York Act. This bill will go a long way to take care of our essential workers like us. During this pandemic, we have honorably put our lives on the line so that we can serve our community. The most the elected officials could do for us is to pass the bill. COVID is real and is still here. And with this variants, we cannot take it for granted. The vaccine is there, but it's not enough. It's not doing a lot for us. Even with vaccine, you still need your PPE. You have to sanitize your area. You have to need all the protection. And being in the midst of taking care of this patient last year, I saw it firsthand what we went through. Most of my colleagues, we work without PPE. We are using just ordinary surgical masks instead of N95. And most of my colleagues, they fall prey. They fell to COVID-19. We don't want this to happen. And then when you look at the essential workers, let me move away from nurses. The essential workers that are here, most of us are undocumented. They have no voice. They cannot talk to their employer because of retaliation or being reported or being deported. The only thing we can do, and we're asking the elected officials, is to pass this New York Hero Act and ask Governor Cuomo to sign it. New York is a big city. We're rich, richer than most of the cities of the states in New York. Why can't we set a pace? We can set a pace where other people will emulate. I don't want to overlabor this, but one thing is that I want them to know that COVID is real. I deal with them all the time. When we thought that the COVID was over, I caught COVID towards November, December. And some of my colleagues are being tested positive day in and day out. We need PPE. We need something to protect us. Like the doctor that said earlier and other people have said, every Friday, every 7 o'clock, everybody try to honor all the essential workers. It's fair. Thank you for doing that. But that's not enough. That is not enough. We need to pass this, and we're asking all the elected officials, please call your colleagues. Let's have this signed, passed, and let Governor Cuomo put it in, sign it to make it a law. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ari, for all the work that you have been doing. Thank you for being in the front lines, and we're going to continue to fight, because here the power of people is what we have. We have a large coalition, as I mentioned earlier, and that's how we're going to be able to win. We're going to win because we have members of the coalition like the Laundry Worker Centers, because we have folks from the Food Chain Workers Alliance. We have folks from UFCW 1500, UFCW 2013. We have our WDSU. We have Teamsters. We have CWA. We have folks from CIR, SEIU. We have folks from 32BJ. We have folks from Make the Road New York, from New York Communities for Change. We have the groups like Cabrini Immigrant Services, groups from the Alianza Agricola. We have groups from across the state at the front lines. We're talking Buffalo, Hudson Valley, Long Island, New York City. We're all working together. This is not about one section of the state. This is about across the state, and we have a large coalition that has been putting forward the voices of workers first, and workers have developed this policy. That's where New York Hero is. So right now we have a message for Governor Cuomo. It is incredibly important to ensure that there is an implementation and enforcement of New York Hero. The New York Hero Act is a necessary piece of the recovery efforts in our state. New York Hero is a crucial and to ensure that millions of New Yorkers can do their jobs safely, and also to ensure that businesses can open safely. We want to protect our businesses, particularly small businesses, and with the New York Hero Act, we'll be able to do that. And right now, Governor Cuomo will have to make a choice. Either he can protect essential frontline workers and businesses with the New York Hero Act, or he can leave them vulnerable to more COVID outbreaks, shutdowns, and job losses that will harm all of us. So right now, we're calling on our legislators and our governor to take and make action now. No more time to wait. It's been more than a year. So that's our message from our coalition, and we will put the site of the website of our coalition here. There's so many organizations that we want you to see and engage, because we are a broad coalition of so many groups fighting at the front lines. Lastly, I would like to just open it up, since I think we're done with the speakers at this moment. Will anyone have any questions from the press? And Patrick, I will pass it on to you and see if there's any questions that might have come up from press.
Hi, everyone. If you're press, please introduce yourself and media outlet. In your media outlet, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, hi, this is Joe Maniscalco from Labor Press and DC Report. Yeah, basically, at what point does this this inaction become critical? I mean, Democrats are in charge. What's the holdup? What's the strategy? What does working and pushing for this legislation really mean?
Thanks for your question, Joe. I can try to answer this, but I tell you what, we're moving along. Like I said earlier, the Senate already voted in favor of the bill. We're moving into the Assembly. In a week or so, we're hoping the Assembly will bring this to a vote. We know that Speaker Hastings cares and actually has been in support of workers. So we believe that this bill will be able to get to the floor pretty soon. And then, as we all know, it will get to the governor's office for review and signed. So I think we're close, but we can never count victory. We want to ensure that once the Assembly votes and pass the bill, we move into the governor's office. And for the governor, it will be an important moment to stand up and really show how much he can be the leader in this particular issue for the country. And this is a moment for our state really to lead. Passing a legislation like this will put us in a place where others will be able to follow across the country. I hope that answers your question, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can any of the elected officials address this question?
Sure.
I can, Maritza.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the legislation has already passed in the Senate. In the Assembly, we were making some minor language amendments to it in the Codes Committee. And it was reported out of Codes, and it's now in Ways and Means. We were in the middle of a budget, and it's been mostly a bottleneck more than political will. And that's why after the budget's passed, we are pushing to make sure that this is on the top of the priority of the Ways and Means Committee.
Morgan Mackay with Spectrum News here. Just to follow up on that question, if you guys are making changes to this bill, wouldn't it have to pass through the Senate again then?
Yes, but it's not major changes. They were minor technical changes that were made to language. It would have to pass the Senate again after those amendments are done, but we don't foresee any holdup there. The chair of the Labor Committee already spoke in favor of this, and she prioritized this out of her committee as well in the Senate. So once we get this through the Assembly Ways and Means Committee on the floor and for a vote, we're confident that it will move quickly through the Senate.
Is there funding in this bill to help provide for businesses, to help them establish some of these protocols, such as like PPE, providing funding for businesses who may be small businesses who maybe don't have the funding to provide their employees with personal protective equipment, hand sanitizer, whatever it might be?
The bill doesn't currently have any funding attached to it, but businesses are supposed to be providing this equipment, and the state has been also providing a lot of this equipment free of charge. I know in my office, we've been distributing PPE to small businesses as well. And we anticipate that the cost is almost inconsequential to the cost of saving lives.
That is true. And also I should add, and as Assemblywoman Reyes said, like businesses are already doing this, because we have to think about also from their perspective. This is about making sure that they are going to be able to sustain the business. If they have an outbreak, they're going to have to close down. So it is something that businesses are already looking, and as Assemblywoman Reyes said, there are also incentives that have been given to businesses to be able to do so. So the bill does not have a specific language on.
Thank you, guys.
Veo que hay una pregunta de Fernando Martínez. Fernando, por favor, del diario, ¿puede hacer la pregunta?
¿Me escuchan?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Ok, fundamentalmente en procesos de discusión de otras leyes durante este año de pandemia, el gobernador desde el principio ha estado bien motivado y lo ha hecho público. Vamos a aprobar esta ley, como pasó hace un par de semanas con la legalización de la marihuana y otros proyectos y otros anteproyectos de ley. ¿Qué han palpado ustedes preliminarmente del ánimo que pueda tener el gobernador Cuomo de firmar esta ley inmediatamente? ¿Qué ha asomado en los escenarios previos sobre esta ley?
Bueno, yo no he oído ninguna oposición de la oficina del gobernador, entonces para mí eso me deja saber de que hay motivación para apoyarla. Y también muchos de los comentarios que él ha hecho sobre la protección de trabajadores también indica que él estaría dispuesto a firmar esta ley.
Okay. Perfecto, gracias.
Fernando, solamente por el lado de hacer la advocacy, te puedo decir que es también en beneficio del gobernador poder firmar esta ley a la final, porque obviamente muchos problemas han salido en términos de cómo se ha recuperado la ciudad y el estado en general, y esta ley podrá ayudar muchísimo más que las guías que nos ha proveído el gobernador. Entonces es una cosa que nos ayudaría a todos, y yo creo que el gobernador lo verá como algo sensato de hacerlo.
Gracias.